The first sound is a machine, a steady electronic tone spaced evenly, the kind of sound a hospital room makes when nothing is happening and everything is wrong. Rigby is in the bed. He is small under the blanket, smaller than he has ever looked, and he is not moving. Mordecai is in the chair beside him, and he is not moving either. There is no music over this. The show does not add anything to tell you how to feel. It just lets the tone repeat and repeat and repeat while a 6-foot blue jay sits next to his best friend and waits to find out whether he is going to wake up. This is an episode of a cartoon about two guys who do not want to mow the lawn. That is the thing about regular show that almost nobody says out loud. It is filed under comedy. It is remembered as the show where a yeti punches a deer and a gumball machine screams about paperwork. And all of that is true. But underneath the slacker jokes and the synthesizer music and the references to 1980s action movies, the show has one subject it returns to more than any other, and that subject is death. Not death as a punchline that resets by the next scene. Death with weight, death that arrives suddenly, that is frequently pointless, and that is very often permanent. The most disturbing episodes of this show are not disturbing because of gore or because of monsters. They are disturbing because of the distance between how friendly the show looks and how seriously it takes the idea that you can die. Tonight, we are going to walk through that distance. We are going to look at the episodes where the comedy quietly stops and the show makes you look at the body in the bed, the friend who does not wake up, the dead who come back through a hole in the world. The entire cast turned into crash victims, and at the very end, the kindest character the show ever made, choosing to die so that everyone else gets to live. None of these are accidents. The show knew exactly what it was doing every single time. Welcome to Velvo. This one goes deep and it goes dark, so get comfortable and let it carry you. Let us get into it. Before we start walking through the episodes, it is worth slowing down and naming the thing we are actually looking for, because it is easy to miss. And missing it is the whole reason the show gets remembered as lighter than it is. The disturbing power of regular show does not live in any single shocking image. It lives in a relationship between two things that are not supposed to sit together. On one side, there is the surface, which is relentlessly, almost aggressively friendly. Bright colors, rounded shapes, a talking gumball machine, a yeti who works as a groundskeeper, a floating ghost with a single permanent high five. The music is warm, the jokes are about avoiding chores and playing video games and getting out of work. Everything about the way the show presents itself is engineered to feel safe, the way a Saturday morning feels safe. And on the other side, underneath that surface, running through episode after episode, there is a machine that takes death completely seriously. Not death as a gag, death as an ending. Death that does not negotiate and does not reset and does not care whether the person it takes was important or whether their dying meant anything at all. The friction between those two things is the entire subject of this video. Most shows pick one. A comedy keeps death off the table, or makes it a joke that undoes itself by the next scene, so that nothing ever truly costs anything. A drama keeps the warmth at a distance, so that when death arrives, you are braced for it, you saw it coming. The tone prepared you. Regular show refuses to pick, it keeps the warmth at full strength, and it keeps the death fully real, and it lets them touch, over and over, without ever resolving the contradiction. That refusal is what makes the dark episodes land the way they do. You are never given the comfort of knowing which kind of show you are watching. The same flat, casual rhythm carries a joke about a sandwich and a severed head, saying a quiet syllable to itself, and the show treats them as the same kind of beat. Because to the show they are, that equivalence, the way it will not rank a death above a punchline in its own pacing, is the most unsettling thing about it, and it is the thread we are going to follow from the very first episode to the very last. So as we go, the thing to listen for is not the scary part. It is the seam. It is the exact place where the friendly surface and the serious death are stitched together, the moment where a children's cartoon about two slackers quietly tells you the truth about mortality and then keeps walking as if it had said nothing unusual. We are going to find that seam in a haunted taxi, in a hospital bed, in a golf cart, on a mountain, in a van, in a hole torn in the sky, and finally in the death of the kindest character the show ever made. And every time we find it, the question to sit with is the same. Why does it work? Why does a show this gentle keep returning to this? The answer, the one this whole journey is building toward, is that the gentleness was never a costume the show wore over the darkness. The gentleness and the darkness were always the same thing, and the finale is where the show finally admits it. Start at the beginning with the episode that announced very early and very clearly what kind of show this was going to be willing to become. It is called Ello Governor, It is the first episode of the second season and the 13th episode of the series overall, and it first aired on the 29th of November 2010. It was written and storyboarded by Sean Sales and Shion Teuchi. On its surface, it is a small, light episode about Rigby being a coward, and most people remember it that way and move past it. But look at what the show is actually practicing here, because it is practicing something it will use for the next 7 years. Here is what happens. Rigby rents a movie from a place called the Movie Shack Hut. It is movie night, and Mordecai assumes they are going to watch something familiar, something safe, the kind of film they have seen 100 times. Rigby has other ideas. He holds up the tape he picked instead. It is a black and white British horror film called Hello Governor, and the premise on the back of the box is this. A London taxicab is possessed by the soul of its driver, a man who was murdered, and the cab returns to take vengeance on the people responsible for his death. Mordecai does not want to watch it. He warns Rigby plainly that if you watch a horror movie at night, you will be scared at night. Rigby scoffs at this. Rigby is the kind of character who always scoffs right up until the moment the thing he scoffed at is standing in his bedroom. They watch it, and the movie does its work. That night, Rigby cannot sleep. He has a nightmare, and the nightmare is one of the more interesting choices in the whole episode, because in it, Rigby is not himself. He is a tough guy. A hardened street fighter named Riggerson, who prefers to be called Fists, and he is in an alley about to throw a punch when the taxi comes out of nowhere and hits him. He wakes up screaming. Think about what that dream is doing for a second. Rigby, who in real life is small and weak and frightened, dreams himself into the body of someone who is none of those things. Someone powerful and unafraid, and even there, even inside the fantasy where he is invincible, the taxi finds him and runs him down. The fear does not care how strong you imagine yourself to be, it gets in anyway. The show does not explain this. It just shows it to you and moves on. The next day, Rigby is wrecked. Benson is out on the grass playing cricket, and a group of people with British accents walk past, and Rigby panics because the movie was British and now anything British is a threat. He runs. He sees the taxi everywhere. And here is where Mordecai makes his decision, and it is a very particular kind of decision. He decides that the way to cure Rigby is desensitization. If Rigby is afraid of the movie, then Rigby should be made to watch the movie again and again. And specifically, he should be made to watch the behind-the-scenes feature, the part that shows you the costume and the rig and the crew, the part designed to drain all the magic out and leave only the machinery. Mordecai believes that if you can see how the trick is done, the trick stops working. That is the whole theory of the episode, stated in the form of a joke. Then comes the climb to the real fear. Pops, sweet and oblivious, offers to take Rigby and Mordecai for a ride in his own taxi, to prove that taxis are friendly. And while they are out driving, another taxi appears behind them, and it is following them, and it does not stop. This is the part the episode has been building toward. The thing they have been telling Rigby is not real is now real, behind them, gaining. Rigby attacks it, and the reveal lands. It is a man in a costume. He works at the video store. His boss made him wear the taxi suit to advertise the new rental, and the reason he has been chasing them is the plainest, most ordinary reason in the world. The tape is overdue. He wants it back. Pops, who is carrying lollipops the way Pops always is, pays the man off in lollipops, they get away, and Rigby is never scared again. The episode even closes the loop on the dream. At the end, Rigby is driving the taxi himself, dressed once more as the gangster from his nightmare, no longer afraid, and if you look at the license plate on the back of the car, it reads Fists. Now, on the level of plot, this is a comedy about a coward learning not to be a coward, and it resolves the way a comedy should by deflating the threat completely. The monster was a guy. The fear was about a late fee. But watch what the show learned to do here, because this is the foundation. The show learned the gap. It learned that the most powerful tool it has is the distance between how something looks and what it actually is. The taxi looks like death and turns out to be a customer service problem. That is funny. But the show also discovered in the same episode the opposite move, the one it would spend years exploiting. That you can take something that looks completely harmless, a children's show, a friendly cartoon about a park, and you can put genuine dread inside it, and the contrast will make the dreadland harder, not softer. There is one more detail worth sitting with, because it is the seed of everything that follows. Mordecai, after watching the film, complains that the movie never actually clarified the central question. It never told you whether the taxi was an evil machine that came alive on its own, or whether it was a man's ghost driving a car. The film leaves it unexplained. And the show treats this as a flaw, as the thing a bored viewer would gripe about. But that ambiguity, the refusal to tell you exactly what kind of death you are looking at, is the exact register regular show will operate in for the rest of its run. Is it a monster? Is it a ghost? Is it a machine that should not be alive? Is it real? The show learned in episode 13 that you do not have to answer that, you just have to make the listener feel the question. That is the whole point of starting here. Hello Governor is the lightest episode we are going to talk about tonight. Nobody dies. The threat is fake, and even so, the show has already shown you its hand. It is fascinated by fear, it is fascinated by the line between the funny and the frightening, and it has figured out that its friendly surface is not a limitation on how dark it can go. It is a delivery system for it. It is worth lingering on how carefully this first episode teaches itself the technique, because everything that follows is a refinement of what gets discovered here. The episode runs the gap in both directions inside a single half hour, almost like a laboratory. First, it runs the gap from frightening to harmless. The taxi looks like vengeance from beyond the grave, and resolves into a minimum wage employee chasing down a late rental. That is the deflation move, the comic direction, and it is the one the episode lets you walk away feeling, because it is the safe one, the one that sends you to bed reassured that the monster was never real. But the second direction is the one the show actually keeps. That is the move where harmless things are revealed to have real menace inside them, where the friendly cartoon turns out to be perfectly willing to frighten you, and where the very fact that nobody expects a show like this to go dark is what gives the darkness its force. The episode discovers that its reputation for safety is not a wall around how far it can go. It is a trapdoor. And the show is honest, even here, about how it intends to handle the most important question, which is the nature of death itself. Remember Mordecai complaining that the film never clarified whether the taxi was a haunted machine or a dead man driving. The show frames that complaint as a small annoyance, the kind of thing a restless viewer grumbles about. But it is actually a thesis statement disguised as a throwaway line. The film withheld the explanation, and the withholding is what made it unsettling. Regular show takes that lesson and builds its whole relationship with death on it. It will show you death constantly, but it will rarely explain it, rarely justify it, rarely tell you what it means, or whether it was fair. It will simply let it happen and decline to comment. And that refusal to explain is precisely what makes its deaths feel less like cartoon events and more like the real thing. Because the real thing does not come with an explanation either. Death in the actual world does not pause to tell you whether it was a machine or a ghost, whether it was deserved, whether it counted. It just arrives, and it is permanent, and you are left to make of it what you can. The show learned in its 13th episode that the most frightening thing it could do was treat death the way death actually behaves. Plainly, without music, without a reason, and without taking anything back. Hold that in mind, because from here on the costume comes off, and what is underneath it does not give the tape back at the end. That was the show flirting with fear, pretending. The taxi was never going to hurt anyone, and everybody watching knew it. But there is a point, not long after, where the show stops pretending. Where the threat to one of the two characters you love most stops being a man in a costume and becomes a body in a hospital bed that may not get back up. And the thing that puts him there is not a ghost, and it is not a monster. It is a hat. That is the next episode, and it is the first time the show looks you in the eye and tells you that the stakes are real. The episode is called Excellent. It is the 17th episode of the 3rd season and the 57th episode of the series, and it first aired on the 27th of February 2012. People love this episode. It is one of the highest rated episodes the show ever made. And it deserves that love, but for a reason that gets lost in how fun it is to watch. Because at its center is one of the bleakest premises the show ever built, and the show knows it. And it commits to it completely. Here is the setup, and listen to how small it is. Mordecai and Rigby are watching television. A commercial comes on for a restaurant eating challenge. The deal is simple. There is an omelet. It is enormous. 12 eggs with chili and cheese and biscuits and a fruit bowl, and if you can finish the whole thing inside 1 hour, you eat for free and you win a hat. The hat is a trucker hat, a mesh-backed cap, and printed across the front are the words, "I am excellent." That is the prize. A novelty hat with a pun on it. Rigby becomes obsessed. He decides he has to have it. Mordecai thinks the hat is lame, thinks nobody wears those, and they argue, and Rigby wins the argument the way Rigby always wins arguments, by being more stubborn, and they go to the restaurant. At the restaurant, the waiter takes Rigby's order, and when Rigby asks for the excellent challenge, the waiter does something interesting. He hesitates. He strongly advises Rigby to pick something else. He does not want to bring it. And Rigby, smug, leans on the idea that the customer is always right, and pressures him, and the waiter finally gives in and brings out the omelet. This is a horror movie beat dressed as a restaurant scene. The person who knows what is behind the door is begging you not to open it, and you open it anyway because you are too proud to listen. Then the show cuts. It does the thing it loves to do, the hard cut that skips the disaster and lands you in the aftermath. We are in an ambulance. Rigby is being rushed to the hospital because the joke that the episode never told you, the information the waiter was trying to protect everyone from, is that Rigby is allergic to eggs. He took a few bites of a 12-egg omelet and his body shut down. At the hospital, the doctor delivers the line flatly, the way doctors deliver lines, and the line is that Rigby is in a coma and that the sheer quantity of egg in his system means he may not survive it. He may die. Over a hat? This needs to be stated plainly because the show is moving fast and it is easy to let it slide by under the music. A 23-year-old has been put into a coma he might not wake from, and the cause is a piece of merchandise that says, "I am excellent." That is the whole engine of the episode, and the way it is written refuses to soften this at all. It does the opposite. It uses the smallness of the hat to make the largeness of the consequence land harder. Watch what happens in the hospital room, because this is where the show shows you something about these characters that none of their jokes ever could. Benson the boss arrives, and Benson does what Benson does. He frames it as a lesson. He tells the assembled workers that this is what happens when you do not show up to your job, that Rigby caused this for himself by goofing off instead of working. And Mordecai punches him in the face. He does not yell first. He hits him, and then he says the thing the show has been quietly true about for 3 seasons. He tells Benson that not everything is about work, that Rigby did not deserve this. And when Benson does not back down, Mordecai goes further and tells Benson that he does not have any real friends, that the only reason any of them spend time with him is that he signs their paychecks. It is a brutal thing to say, and the show lets it be brutal. There is no music cue telling you it is a comedy beat. A man is in a coma and his best friend is so frightened and so angry that he is destroying a relationship in the waiting room. That is the behavior of someone who is terrified. The show does not tell you Mordecai is terrified. It just shows you a person who has stopped being able to hold himself together. Then Mordecai makes a promise. He promises he will go back and win the hat. And the back half of the episode becomes the thing everyone remembers, the part that is genuinely thrilling, a full action sequence with a training montage set to a power ballad about needing a hero, where Mordecai goes back to the restaurant to eat the omelet himself, and the rest of the park workers show up to physically hold off the restaurant staff so that he can finish. It is exciting, and it is funny, and it is paced like the climax of a much bigger movie. But do not let the fun of it erase what is underneath, because the show has another card to play, and it plays it at the very end. When Mordecai finally finishes the omelet, he is not simply handed a hat. He is teleported. The challenge has a hidden second stage that the commercial never mentioned. He arrives in a cave, or a kind of strange in-between place, and there is a knight waiting, the excellent knight, and the knight explains the real rules. To claim the prize, Mordecai must choose the correct hat from a selection, and if he chooses wrong, he dies. The knight is not speaking in metaphor. To make sure you understand that, the knight tells him about the last person who attempted this. A man named Jonathan Kimball. Jonathan Kimball chose the wrong hat. He reached for a crown, because a crown looks like the grandest prize, and choosing the crown killed him. He is dead. He died doing exactly what Mordecai is about to do. Sit with the shape of that for a moment. The trucker hat with the pun on it, the lame mesh cap that Rigby wanted off a television commercial, is the prize at the end of a trial that has already killed at least one man and is fully prepared to kill another. The novelty and the lethality are stacked directly on top of each other, and the show refuses to resolve the tension between them. It just lets both be true at the same time. A hat, a corpse, the same object. Mordecai survives because he remembers. He remembers the way Rigby described the hat back at the very start, the trucker-style mesh cap, and he uses that description to pick the right one out of the lineup. And the knight congratulates him by calling him excellent, and he teleports back. And he carries the hat to the hospital, and he places it on Rigby's head, and that is what wakes him. Rigby comes out of the coma. The promise is kept. The friendship survives. It is, in the end, a story about how far one friend will go for another, and that is a real and a moving thing, and it is why people love the episode. But the reframe is this: strip away the music and the montage and the win, and what you are left with is a children's comedy in which a main character is put into a possibly fatal coma by his own appetite for a worthless object, in which his best friend has to risk his own death to undo it, and in which the universe of the show contains a literal death trap that ordinary people walk into and do not walk out of. The show built all of that, and then it wrapped it in a power ballad so that you would feel triumphant instead of frightened. That is not a flaw in the episode. That is the method. The show learned here that it could put a genuine threat of death at the center of an episode, and you would still laugh, you would still cheer, you would still call it one of the best episodes of the series, because the threat was real, but the surface was warm. Remember that, because every episode after this is going to use the same trick, and it is going to use it on people you cannot bring back with a hat. There is one more thing worth drawing out of Excellent before we leave it, because it is the moment the show quietly raises its own stakes for everything that follows, and it does it through the character of Mordecai, rather than through any monster. Watch how the episode uses fear to strip Mordecai down to something honest. For most of the show, Mordecai is the reasonable one, the steadier half of the pair, the one who knows better and goes along anyway. He is not given to outbursts, he manages, and the coma takes all of that away from him in a single afternoon. The punch he throws at Benson is not a comic beat, and the show refuses to score it as one. It is the action of a person who has run out of the ability to stay calm, who is standing in a hospital waiting room while his best friend lies in a bed that he might never get out of, and who cannot hold the fear inside his body any longer, so it comes out as violence and then as the cruelest true thing he can find to say. The show does not tell you Mordecai is terrified. It does something better and more disturbing. It shows you a steady person becoming unsteady, and it lets you do the math yourself about what kind of fear it takes to do that to someone. That is a portrait of grief in advance, of anticipatory mourning, the particular terror of sitting beside someone who is still alive but might not stay that way, and it is rendered with no narration at all. And then sit, one more time, with the object at the center of it, because the object is the whole argument of the episode compressed into a single image. A trucker hat with a pun printed on it, the lamest possible prize, a piece of novelty merchandise from a television commercial, the kind of thing you would find crushed at the bottom of a closet. The show stacks that hat directly on top of a coma, a death trap, and a corpse named Jonathan Kimball who reached for a crown and died for it. And it never once lets the silliness of the hat cancel the seriousness of the death, or the seriousness of the death cancel the silliness of the hat. They stay welded together, equally true, refusing to resolve. That is the gap doing its work at full power. The novelty and the lethality occupy the same space, and the show declines to tell you which one is the real one because its answer is that they both are. A person can very nearly die permanently for something worthless, and the worthlessness does not make the dying any less real. If anything, it makes it worse because it removes the last comfort, the comfort of meaning. The coma was not in service of anything. It happened because Rigby wanted a hat, and the show looks at that and does not flinch. And that refusal to flinch, the willingness to let a death be absurd and real at the same time, and to take neither quality back, is the exact skill the show is quietly rehearsing here, in the warmest and most crowd-pleasing episode it ever made. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So far, the show has been careful, the threats have been real, but they have stopped just short. The taxi was a costume. The coma had a cure. There has always been a hat at the end. But once a year, the show gave itself permission to take all of that away. Once a year, it told a kind of story where there was no cure, no rescue, no waking up, where the characters could simply die and the show did not have to undo it. They called these stories the terror tales of the park, and the first one is where you can finally see, with no safety net, what this show actually wanted to do. The first Terror Tales of the Park is the 4th episode of the 3rd season and the 44th episode of the series, and it first aired on the 10th of October 2011. The creator, G. Quintel, has said the inspiration was the Treehouse of Horror specials on The Simpsons, the annual Halloween episodes where the rules of the show are suspended, where the characters can be put through anything, where death does not count against the timeline. 5 more of these would follow, one almost every year until the show ended. But the first one is the one to start with, because it is the one where you can feel the show realizing how far it is allowed to go, and then going there. The frame is gentle. The groundskeepers are sitting around telling each other scary stories, taking turns, the way people do. That is all. And inside that gentle frame, the show tells 3 stories, and the escalation across the 3 is the entire structure. So follow it in order. The first story is told by Pops, and it is called Creepy Doll, and it is a parody of Child's Play. Pops rediscovers a doll from his childhood, a little Victorian figure named Percy that he has not seen since he was a boy, and the doll comes to life. But Pops, being Pops, has no instinct for menace at all. The doll's terrible power, the thing Pops presents as the height of horror, is that Percy likes to draw on people's faces. That is it. The doll marks on things. Pops describes this as Percy's most frightening trait, his unusual desire to mark on things, and he is completely sincere about it. Everyone else listening to the story is unimpressed. Muscle Man flatly says the story was lame. And it is, deliberately. The show is starting low. It is starting with a horror story told by the one character incapable of being frightening, and it is using that as the baseline so that the next 2 stories can climb away from it. The second story is Muscle Man's, and it is called Death Metal Crash Pit. And here the show takes its first real step toward what it is building to, because here a main character dies. The park has a giant pit where Muscle Man and High Five Ghost like to wreck cars, a place they call the Crash Pit. In the story, the two of them find an RV that is haunted by the ghosts of a dead heavy metal band, and the ghosts will not stop playing their terrible music, and the only way to be free of them is to send the RV and themselves into the Crash Pit. So Muscle Man does. He jams a cinder block onto the gas pedal and drives the whole thing over the edge, and the band is destroyed a second time, and there is a huge explosion. And then Muscle Man floats up out of the wreckage, and he is relieved because the music has finally stopped, and then he notices that he is translucent. He asks High Five Ghost if he is dead. High Five Ghost confirms that he is, and Muscle Man's reaction is to shrug and decide it was worth it, that it was the best Crash Pit ever. This is the first time the show ever killed Muscle Man on screen, and it played it as a punchline, a guy who is fine with being dead because at least the bad band is gone. But notice what just happened underneath the joke. The show killed one of its main characters and let him stay dead through the end of the segment, and the only reason it was allowed to do that is the word Halloween at the top of the episode. The license is the whole point. Give this show a reason that death will not count, and watch how quickly it reaches for death. And then comes the third story, In the House, and this is where the show drops the pretense entirely, and it is genuinely one of the most disturbing things it ever produced. The framing is innocent enough. It is Halloween night, and Mordecai has come up with a scheme to maximize his candy, which is to dress as a father with 5 fake children, the idea being that a man with 5 kids gets 5 times the candy. But the house they end up at belongs to a wizard, and the wizard, irritated, turns Rigby into a house, an actual building, and then proceeds to kill the rest of the cast, one at a time inside that house, in detail. I want to describe these deaths plainly, because the plainness is the point, and because the show itself was not plain about it. The show was graphic about it to the degree that a good deal of this segment was censored when it aired in the United Kingdom. Muscle Man is grabbed and his skin is removed. He lives just long enough after being skinned to flex his exposed muscles, a final joke on a body that is already a corpse, and then he falls dead. High Five Ghost answers a phone and is sucked into it and ground down into ectoplasm, and the liquefied remains of him spray out across his friends. Benson is flushed into a toilet with enough force that it cracks his head open, and what comes out is gumballs. Skips is pulled up the chimney into the fireplace and burned alive. Pops is thrown around the room, stuffed into a closet, and then simply vanished into nothingness, erased. And Mordecai is decapitated, and his severed head lives for one more beat, just long enough to look around and say, quietly, huh. That single syllable is the show in miniature. Huh. Not a scream, not a final speech, a man's head separated from his body, registering the situation with mild confusion and then going still. The show does not add a horror sting. It does not slow down to wring tears out of you. It just lets the head say, huh, and moves on to the next death, the same way it would move on to the next joke. Because to the show, they are the same kind of beat. That is what makes it disturbing, not the violence, which is cartoonish, the flatness, the total absence of comment. The show murders its entire main cast, every one of them, in ways designed to be genuinely unpleasant, and it treats the whole sequence with the exact same casual rhythm it uses for everything else. There is no music telling you to be horrified. There is no character mourning anyone. The deaths arrive and the deaths are absorbed, and the segment keeps walking. And then there is the ending, which retroactively poisons the gentle frame the whole episode rested on. Remember that the entire premise was that these are just stories, just friends taking turns scaring each other on a calm night. The last reveal is that Rigby, sitting there in the framing device, was the wizard all along. He turns to the screen, his eyes go red, his face fills the frame far too close, the way a face fills the frame in the very last second of a nightmare, and he says, "Happy Halloween." And the episode ends. Think about what that twist actually does. It means there is no safe narrator. The friendly wraparound, the cozy circle of friends telling stories, was never safe, because the person telling the worst of the stories was the monster from the worst of the stories, looking out at you. The show took the one structural element that was supposed to protect you, the distance of a story being told, and it collapsed that distance and put the wizard's red eyes against the glass. There is nowhere in this episode that is not the inside of the horror. This is the show with the safety off. Everything we looked at before this had a break. The taxi was a costume, the coma had a hat. But in the terror tales, given the smallest excuse, the show immediately and thoroughly killed everyone it had, graphically, with no music and no grief, and then it leaned in close and wished you a happy Halloween. The reason this matters is not that it is shocking for its own sake, it is that it tells you what the show's actual appetite is. When the rules let it, this is where it goes. The friendly park is a holding pattern. The crash pit and the wizard's house are what the show dreams about. And it is going to keep finding ways to bring that appetite back into the regular, supposedly safe episodes where there is no Halloween label to tell you it does not count. It is worth pausing on why the Terra Tales format gives the show permission to be this honest, because the permission is the secret engine of the whole thing. On an ordinary week, the show is bound by continuity. Whatever happens has to be something the show can live with the following week, because the characters have to come back, the park has to still be standing, the friendships have to persist. That constraint forces the show to keep a break on, to make sure every threat has an undo. But the annual Halloween installment lifts the constraint entirely. The stories do not count. They are explicitly outside the timeline, sealed off, consequence-free, and that seal is what lets the show finally reach for the thing it has been circling. And what is striking, what tells you about the show's true appetite, is how immediately and how completely it reaches the moment the break is released. It does not ease into the freedom. It does not test it carefully. Given a single episode where death will not count, the show kills its entire cast, graphically and detail, and then turns the storyteller into the monster. That speed is the revelation. A show that merely tolerated darkness would use the Halloween license sparingly. This show uses it the way a held breath is finally let out. The eagerness is the point. And notice the specific texture of how the deaths in the wizard's house are staged, because the texture is the disturbing part, far more than the content. The deaths themselves are cartoonish, exaggerated the stuff of any over-the-top horror parody. What makes the sequence land as genuinely unsettling rather than merely gross is the flatness, the total absence of comment. There is no swell of music to tell you to be afraid. No character stops to mourn the one who just died before the next one dies. The deaths arrive at the exact tempo the show uses for jokes, one after another, absorbed and discarded, and that equivalence between the rhythm of a death and the rhythm of a punchline is the single most characteristic thing this show does. It is the same equivalence the head is performing when it says huh and goes still, the same one the golf cart call will perform in a moment, the same one the skeletons on the mountain perform by simply lying there in the background while the plot walks past. The show is not interested in making you cry at its deaths. It is interested in making you notice that it will not slow down for them, and that refusal to slow down is closer to how death actually moves through a life than any amount of mournful scoring would be. The Wizard's House is the purest early demonstration of the method, and the reason it had to be censored abroad is the same reason it works. The show meant it. One of the strangest of those ways is the one we are going to look at next, and it is strange because it is not about a monster at all. It is about kindest and about a creature that gets exactly one day of being alive and about what it decides to do with that day once it understands how the day is going to end. The episode is called Out of Commission. It is a third season episode and it first aired in the summer of 2012. On paper, it is one of the most disposable premises the show ever ran. With a golf cart comes to life, that is the logline. It sounds like filler. And then you watch it, and you realize the show has quietly used a talking golf cart to tell a complete story about a life and a death, start to finish, in 11 minutes, and that it is one of the saddest things the show ever did, precisely because it never once asks you to take it seriously. The cart in question is the old golf cart that Mordecai and Rigby drive in nearly every episode. The beat-up little vehicle that is practically a character already. At the start of the episode, Benson announces that the park has come into some extra money this year, and so he has bought a replacement, a sleek, expensive German-engineered cart. And he tells Mordecai and Rigby that they can take the old one to the dump. The old cart is on its last legs, the engine is failing, it is time. And Mordecai and Rigby, on the drive out to the dump, decide that the cart deserves a proper send-off, so they stop and pour soda into the engine as a kind of toast, a goodbye. And the soda hits the motor, and the motor turns over and the cart wakes up. It is alive, and the very first thing it understands, in the first seconds of its consciousness, is where it is being taken and why. It knows it is on the way to the dump. It knows it is being thrown away, and it says so. It laments that it has only been alive for 30 seconds and it is already being sent to die. Think about that as a sentence on its own, stripped of the fact that it is a golf cart saying it. A being becomes conscious, and the first fact available to that consciousness is its own imminent disposal. It is born already knowing it is going to die, and knowing roughly when. So it makes a request, it asks for more time, it asks for one more day, and within that day it asks for a series of things, and the show plays this as an escalating comedy of demands. But look at the list, because the list is the most human thing in the episode. The cart wants to go to a concert, it wants to go bungee jumping, it wants to get a tattoo, it wants to watch a sunset, it wants to go through a car wash, a real one. It wants to get into a bar fight, because that is something it has always wanted to do. This is a bucket list. This is the thing people make when they are told how much time they have left. The cart, given the knowledge that its life is ending, does not ask to be saved. It asks to live. It asks to do the things, to feel the things, to have the experiences that being alive is supposed to contain, and it tries to cram an entire lifetime of them into the only afternoon it is ever going to get. And then it chooses how to go. After the concert and the tattoo and the sunset and the car wash and the bar fight, the cart asks for one final thing. It wants to go out on its own terms, in a way that feels like something, and so it asks to drive itself off a cliff into the water below. With fireworks, a firework-lit plunge into a watery grave. Mordecai and Rigby give it this. They watch their old cart accelerate toward the edge and launch itself off and fall, lit up against the dark, into the water. And that is the end of the cart's life. A chosen death. A death the cart designed for itself on the one day it was allowed to be alive after deciding it had done enough. Now, here is the part that turns the whole thing from sad to genuinely bleak, and it is delivered in the flattest, most throwaway manner imaginable, which is exactly why it lands the way it does. Right after they watch the cart go off the cliff, Mordecai and Rigby get a call from Benson, and Benson tells them that there has been an accounting error. The park does not actually have the extra money after all. They cannot keep the fancy new German cart. He also mentions in passing that the new cart's heated seat malfunctioned and gave Muscleman third-degree burns across most of his backside. The point of the call is that they do not need to get rid of the old cart at all. They need it back. They should not have taken it to the dump in the first place. But they already watched it die. Let that sit for a second. The cart's entire arc, its birth, its terror, its bucket list, its beautiful chosen death off a cliff in a shower of fireworks, all of it was set in motion by a financial mistake. The cart did not have to die. There was never a real reason. The premise that sent it to the dump the extra money was an error in a spreadsheet, and by the time the error was caught, the cart was at the bottom of a lake. Its death was not a tragedy that the universe required. It was a clerical accident. And the show does not stop to mourn this, does not give Mordecai and Rigby a tearful realization, does not slow down. It just lets the call land and lets the episode end, leaving you holding the knowledge that a creature lived for one day and died for nothing, and that the friends who loved enough to give it that day will carry that around forever, and the show will never bring it up again. This is the reframe, and it is the whole reason this episode belongs in a list about the show's darkest material, even though there is no monster and no gore. This is not a comedy about a talking car. It is a compressed model of a mortal life. A being comes into existence, immediately confronts the certainty of its own ending, and responds not with despair, but with a frantic, tender attempt to experience everything before the end arrives, and then meets death on its own terms, with dignity and with fireworks. And the universe reveals, too late, that the death served no purpose at all. That is not a story for children about a vehicle. That is one of the oldest and heaviest stories there is. And the show told it sideways, in 11 minutes, using a golf cart, so that you would laugh the whole way through and only feel the weight of it after the credits, on the drive home, when you realize what you actually just watched. And it points at something the show keeps insisting on. In this universe, death is real even when it is pointless. Especially when it is pointless, the cart's death was avoidable and meaningless and permanent, all three at once, and the show treated all three as simply true. It did not protect you from the meaninglessness. It is the same move as the head saying huh in the wizard's house. The show looks at a death, declines to explain it or justify it or undo it, and moves on, because that is what death does. It moves on without you. There is a particular cruelty in the order the show chooses to deliver its information, and it rewards a second look, because the order is doing almost all of the emotional work. The episode could have told you about the accounting error first. It could have let Mordecai and Rigby learn, before the cliff, that the new cart was a mistake and the old one was needed. And then the story would have been about a rescue, a race to save the cart before it went over the edge, and it would have ended in relief. The show deliberately does not do this. It lets the cart die first. It gives you the entire arc, the birth, the terror, the bucket list, the chosen plunge into the water lit by fireworks, complete and finished. And only after the cart is gone forever does it deliver the phone call that reveals the whole thing was set in motion by a clerical error. The relief that a different ordering would have offered is withheld on purpose. You are not allowed to feel the rescue, because there is no rescue. You are only allowed to feel the waste, and you feel it after the fact, when nothing can be done, which is exactly when waste is felt in real life. That choice is the show telling you something it believes about death, stated through structure rather than dialogue. It believes that the worst deaths are the avoidable ones, the ones that did not have to happen, the ones that turn out when you trace them back to rest on something as small and stupid as a mistake in a spreadsheet. And it believes that you almost never learn this in time. You learn it afterward, in the flat aftermath, in a phone call that arrives a few seconds too late to matter. The cart's death is dignified on its own terms, freely chosen, even beautiful, and the show honors that. But it surrounds the dignity with meaninglessness because both are true at once, and the show will not let you keep one without the other. A creature lived for a single day, met its end with grace and on its own terms, and the reason it had to die at all was nothing, an error, corrected too late. The friends who loved it enough to give it that perfect day will carry the knowledge of the nothing for the rest of their lives, and the show will never mention it again, and it ends right there, leaving you holding it. That refusal to soften the waist to give you the rescue ending that was sitting right there within reach is the show treating a talking golf cart with more honesty about death than most stories ever manage to treat a person. Before we move on ourselves, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The cart was new to being alive, and so it makes a kind of sense that death caught it off guard. But there is a character on this show who has been alive for longer than almost anything else in the world. A character who cannot die of age, and the show built an entire episode around the discovery that even he is not safe. Even the immortal one has a way to die. And to make sure you understood that it was real, the show showed you the bodies of everyone who got there before him. The character is Skips, and the episode is Skips' stress. It is a 4th season episode, and it first aired on the 13th of May 2013. To understand why it works, you have to know the one thing about Skips that the show had established long before this. Skips does not age, and Skips does not die. He is immortal. He has been alive for an extraordinarily long time, long enough to have learned everything, to have met death personally, and to be on a first-name basis with figures most people only meet once. He is the steady one. He is the one who always knows what to do, who has the ancient remedy for whatever impossible thing the episode has summoned. He is, in every sense that matters, the character you cannot lose. And this episode exists to tell you that you can. It begins small, the way these always do. Skips is under pressure, there is too much to do, and he is the kind of worker who absorbs everyone else's problems and never sets any of them down, and his stress is building. The way the show externalizes this is to send everyone to a pharmacy that has one of those machines, the kind that takes your blood pressure or measures some vital sign while you sit in a plastic chair and grip a sensor. Skips puts his hand on the sensor, and the machine cannot handle what it finds. The reading climbs past whatever its normal scale is. It goes critical, then it goes off the chart entirely, past the point the chart was ever built to show. A doctor comes over, alarmed, and looks at Skips' arm, and there's a dark line running through it, a visible mark of the stress moving inside him. And the doctor tells him the thing that the rest of the episode is going to honor completely. If Skips does not bring his stress down, the stress is going to kill him. The immortal character has found the one door death can still come through. Benson, to his credit, takes this seriously and immediately gives Skips the rest of the day off. And Skips tries to rest. He lies down to take a nap, the obvious sensible thing, the thing you were supposed to do when a doctor tells you to lower your stress, but he cannot. When he closes his eyes, he does not find peace, he finds a nightmare. He dreams himself into a circus of fear, where all the park workers surround him and pester him, each one demanding that he do something, each one adding to the pile. And the dream does not calm him, it does the opposite. It cranks the stress higher so that even sleep, even the escape, becomes another place where the thing that is killing him gets worse. He wakes up no better than before. Watch what that detail is doing. The show is telling you that this is not a problem he can simply decide to stop having. He cannot rest his way out of it. The pressure follows him into unconsciousness. There is no off switch. The next day he refuses to stay home. He shows up to work anyway, insisting he is fine, because of course he does. Because that is exactly the behavior of someone whose whole identity is being the one who handles things. And on the stairs, his body betrays him. He stumbles, falls, knocks himself out cold, and when he comes to, the dark line on his arm has spread. There are now black lines across his chest, multiple of them, and they are reaching toward his heart. The show is drawing the deadline directly onto his body. You can see it advancing. You can see how much time is left by how close the lines have crept. This is a wellness story, a story about stress management, the kind of subject a cartoon usually handles, with a gentle lesson about taking deep breaths. And the show has turned it into a visible countdown to a heart that is about to stop. The cure is to go to the mountain, specifically the Himalayas, where there is a bell, a great old bell, and the idea is that Skips must climb to it and ring it, and in doing so confront and defeat the physical manifestation of his stress, a monster. Before that monster, and the lines on his chest, finish the job. So they make the climb. And on the way up, the show does the single thing that elevates this episode from a clever metaphor into something genuinely unsettling. And it does it almost in passing the way it always does the worst things. As Skips and the others ascend toward the bell, they pass bodies, skeletons, the decayed remains of other people who came up this same mountain for the same reason to wring this same affliction, and who did not make it. Their armor is still on them. Their weapons are still lying where they fell. They got this far, and the stress killed them before they reached the top, and their bones have been sitting here on the path ever since. A row of everyone who tried and failed. That is the detail to hold on to. The show could have made the mountain empty, a generic obstacle course on the way to a boss fight. Instead, it littered the path with corpses, and it did not draw your attention to them with music or a lingering shot or a horrified line of dialogue. It just put them there in the background as Skips walks past the way you would pass mile markers. And what those skeletons tell you is that this is not a special threat invented for Skips. This is a thing that kills people routinely. There is an entire population of the dead on this mountain. Skips is not facing a unique monster. He is walking the same path that has already ended a long line of others, and the bones are the proof that the bell does not save everyone who reaches for it. He reaches the top, there is a battle, a monster of his own stress with multiple heads, and Skips fights it and rings the bell and wins, and the lines recede and he lives. And the show ends on a small, warm grace note, the kind it is very good at. When there is a flat tire to change afterward, everyone goes out of their way to make sure Skips does not have to do it. Even Mordecai and Rigby, even the two who usually avoid all work. The lesson lands softly. Let people carry things for you. Do not absorb it all alone. It is genuinely sweet. But the reframe sits underneath the sweetness, and it is heavier than the lesson. The show took its one truly immortal character, the one being who is supposed to be exempt from death, and it found the crack. It established on the record that immortality is not the same thing as safety, that you can be unkillable by age and time and still be killed by what living does to you. And then, to make sure you did not treat this as a cartoon exaggeration that would wave away, it showed you the skeletons. It showed you that the threat is real enough to have a body count, that the mountain is a graveyard, that plenty of others walked this exact road and ended as bones in their own armor. The show is not subtle about what it is doing here. It is telling you that in this world, the thing that everyone privately believes about themselves, that they are the exception, that the rules of mortality apply to other people, is a lie even for the one character who has the best possible reason to believe it. Skips of all people is not safe, and if he is not safe, no one is. There is one more thing this episode does that none of the others do, and it quietly changes the shape of the threat. In every other dark episode we have looked at, the thing that kills comes from outside. The taxi, the wizard, the cliff, the portal full of resurrected enemies still to come, all of them arrive from somewhere beyond the character and bear down on him. The thing trying to kill Skips comes from inside him. The creature he has to fight at the top of the mountain, the multi-headed monster standing between him and the bell, is his own stress, given a body. It is not an enemy he made or a curse someone placed on him. It is the accumulated weight of his own life, of caring too much and absorbing everyone else's problems and never setting any of them down, turned into the thing that will stop his heart. That is a different and more unsettling kind of mortal danger than a haunted cab or a wizard, because there is no door to lock against it. It is not coming for him. It is already in him. It has been the whole time. And the climb up the mountain is really a climb toward the part of himself he has to face before it finishes the job. That is the show pressing on death from the inside of a regular episode. No Halloween label required. But once a year, it still gave itself the Halloween label, and it kept using it to push further than it could anywhere else. The first time, it murdered the cast inside a story and revealed the storyteller was the monster. The second time, it did something worse. It stopped pretending the deaths only happened inside the stories. It let the deaths happen in the frame. The episode is the second Terror Tales of the Park, and it is the third episode of the fourth season and the 82nd episode of the series, and it first aired on the 15th of October. 2012. Like the first one, its stories are not part of the show's real timeline. They are Halloween tales told for the night and then set aside. But this installment does something the first one only flirted with, and that is the reason it belongs here on its own rather than sitting beside the first, as more of the same. The first Terror Tales kept its deaths inside the stories and protected the frame, and then it broke that protection only in the final second, with the wizard's red eyes against the glass. The second Terror Tales builds the breaking of the frame into the entire architecture of the episode. By the time it is over, the line between the story and the place the story is being told has collapsed completely, and the people telling the scary tales have themselves become the subject of one. The frame this time is a drive, The whole group is on its way to a Halloween party, riding together in Skip's van, and they are in costume. And the show takes a moment to show you each of them, which is worth noticing, because it makes the frame feel ordinary and affectionate right before it turns on them. Mordecai is dressed as Frankenstein's monster, Rigby is dressed as a professional wrestler, Benson is a pirate, Pops is wrapped as a mummy, Skips is Dracula, Muscle Man has come as a president in the tall hat and dark beard of Abraham Lincoln. High Five Ghost, who is already a floating head with a pair of hands, has put on a fake mustache and called that a costume. Thomas is a ninja, Margaret and Eileen are dressed as pilgrims. It is a van full of friends in homemade outfits on their way to a party. Hold that image because the episode is going to spend its whole length taking it apart. To pass the drive, they tell each other scary stories, and there are 3 of them, and the 3 climb in the usual way. The first story is Mordecai's, and it is called Payback. In it, Mordecai owes a small debt to an unpleasant older acquaintance, a man called Uncle Steve, the kind of person you cross the street to avoid. They end up at a bowling alley together, and there by accident, Mordecai causes his death. Steve's necktie gets caught in the mechanism of the bowling ball return, and he is dragged into the machine and killed. And then, of course, Steve comes back, because this is a ghost story. But the show makes a very specific and very pointed joke about what kind of ghost he is. He does not return for some vast supernatural revenge. He does not want Mordecai's soul or his life. He comes back relentlessly, looming out of mirrors and appearing where he should not be, in pursuit of the $5 he is still owed. The entire haunting is a collections call. A man has died horribly over a bowling accident, and his restless spirit has crossed back over the threshold of death for the sake of $5. The show takes the genuine horror of a sudden, undignified death and yokes it to something petty and small, and the gap between the two, the cosmic machinery of a vengeful ghost running on a $5 grudge, is exactly the kind of joke this show tells. The kind where the death is real and the framing is absurd, and you are meant to feel both at once. The second story is Margaret's, and the show is careful about how she tells it because Margaret is not in the van. She delivers her story over the van's speakerphone, her voice coming in from somewhere else, which quietly keeps her outside of what is about to happen to the people who are physically in the vehicle. Her story is called Party Bus. A group of partygoers boards a party bus, the kind that is supposed to be a moving celebration, all lights and music, and the bus turns out to be haunted, and the nature of the haunting is that riding it ages you. As the bus drives, time accelerates on its passengers. They grow older and older, decades landing on them in the space of minutes, their bodies withering while the party lights keep flashing around them. And when the driver is finally seen clearly, the driver is a skeleton, a dead thing at the wheel, ferrying the living into old age and past it. The passengers age until there is nothing left of them. It is a clean, eerie little fable about a vehicle that carries you against your will all the way to the end of a life, and it is worth keeping in mind that it is being told inside a vehicle by a voice on a speaker to a group of friends who are themselves being carried somewhere in the dark. The third story is Benson's, and it is called Wallpaper Man, and it is the one that turns toward pure body horror. In it, the characters hire an interior designer, a figure named Jan, to redo a room, and Jan is not what Jan appears to be. Jan is revealed to be a giant spider, and rather than spinning ordinary webs, this spider shoots wallpaper, sheets of it, papering its victims and the walls and trapping people inside layers of pattern, sealing them in. The horror of being wrapped, of being covered over and enclosed alive, is the engine of the segment, and the show uses it to surface a real detail about one of its characters. This is where Rigby's claustrophobia comes out, his genuine panic at being closed in, trapped, unable to move. The story is built specifically to press on the fear of confinement, of being sealed into a small space you cannot escape, which is its own particular flavor of dread, and which the show will pay off in a moment, in a way the story did not warn you about. Because then the stories end, and the van arrives at the house where the party is, and this is where the second Terror Tales does the thing the first one would not. Up to now, everything frightening has been safely inside a tale. The bowling ghost, the aging bus, the wallpaper spider, all of it has been somebody's story, told to pass a drive. But as they pull up, the easy friction between the characters flares. Rigby, being Rigby, taunts Benson. It escalates into a shoving match, the kind of dumb physical squabble the show stages 100 times without consequence. Except this time there is a consequence. The van, with everyone in it, crashes into a tree, and it kills them. Everyone in the van who is not already a ghost? The show does not stage this as a near miss or a comic pratfall they walk away from. The crash is fatal, and the next thing you see is the cast at the party as ghosts, translucent, drifting through the celebration they were driving toward, having arrived at it dead. High Five Ghost, who was already a ghost, is the lone exception, which is its own small dark joke. The one member of the group who was dead before the crash is the only one the crash does not change. They made it to the party. They are simply no longer alive for it. And in the bitter, perfectly in character button on the whole thing, Benson reacts to their collective death the way Benson reacts to a broken down golf cart or a missed shift. He blames Rigby for the crash, and he fires him. Rigby objects that he cannot be fired, because he is dead. Even death does not interrupt the management structure. The boss is still the boss, the screw-up is still the screw-up, and being a ghost does not get you out of being held responsible. Look closely at what this does to the architecture we have been tracking. In every prior episode, and in the first Terror Tales most of all, there has been a layer of protection between the audience and the death. The death happened to a character inside a story, or it happened under the Halloween banner that told you it would not count, or it happened to a golf cart, or it stopped just short. Here, the show takes the frame itself, the supposedly safe outer layer where friends sit around telling tales, the layer whose entire job is to be the place you return to when a scary story is over, and it kills everyone in it. The frame is not a refuge. The frame is just another place people die. The stories were never the dangerous part. The drive home was... It is worth dwelling on how completely this rearranges the unspoken contract between a show like this and the person watching it. The wraparound device, the cozy circle of friends taking turns telling tales, exists in horror anthologies for one reason: to give the audience a home base, a place that is safe by definition, a frame that says no matter how frightening the story gets, you will always be returned here, to the campfire, to the living room, to the people who are merely telling stories and are therefore fine. The frame is the promise that it is only a story, and this episode breaks that promise as a matter of structure, rather than as a final second twist. It does not wait until the last shot to violate the frame the way the first Terror Tales did with the wizard's eyes. It builds the violation into the architecture so that the frame itself, the drive, the van, the friends, becomes the thing that kills them. There is no campfire to return to. The campfire crashes into a tree. The place that was supposed to be safe by definition turns out to be exactly as lethal as the stories told within it, and the show makes you feel the floor disappear. And the detail that this all begins with an ordinary squabble is the part that should stay with you, because it is the part that reaches outside the cartoon. The cast does not die facing a monster, or completing a dangerous ritual, or making some heroic sacrifice. They die because Rigby taunts Benson and a stupid shoving match breaks out in a moving vehicle. It is the most mundane possible cause, the kind of pointless friction that happens in the show 100 times without consequence, and the one time the show lets it have a consequence, the consequence is everyone. That is a recognizable shape. That is how a great many real deaths actually happen, not through grand confrontation but through a small distraction at the wrong moment. An ordinary lapse that any other day would have meant nothing. The show takes its lightest recurring dynamic, the bickering between the boss and the screw-up, and lets it kill the whole cast, and then, in the blackest comic note in the episode, it has Benson respond to their collective death by firing Rigby for causing it. Because even on the far side of dying, the structures of blame and work and consequence do not release their grip. The frame was never a refuge. It was just the last place you would think to look for the ending, which is precisely why the show hid the ending there. And there is evidence the show wanted to push even harder than the version that aired. A darker ending was developed and apparently cut, very likely because of where it pointed. In that version, after the crash, the ghosts pass by the wreck of the van and see their own bodies inside it, an image of looking at your own corpse. A paramedic on the scene turns toward them, and the paramedic has a demonic skull where a face should be, and shrieks at them. The driver of the tow truck is also a skull. The doors will not open, and then a flaming portal opens in the road beneath them. An image that reads very plainly as the ground splitting to pull them down somewhere they do not want to go. It is hard to look at that sequence and not read it as the characters being dragged toward hell, and it is not difficult to understand why a children's network might decide that a cartoon implying its likable cast had been damned was a step past the line. Even for Halloween, the finished episode keeps the deaths and the ghosts and the firing and lets you sit with the crash, and stops short of the portal, but the portal was drawn. The show looked at killing its entire cast in the frame and asked whether it could also send them to hell, and somebody had to decide that no, that was the part to hold back. For what it is worth, the audience came. This second Terror Tales drew a larger viewership than the half-hour special the show ran around the same stretch, the one we are about to discuss, which tells you something about how comfortable the audience had become with this annual permission to watch the cast die. The disturbing material was not driving people away, it was, in its strange way, part of the appeal. But the deeper point is the architectural one, and it is the reason this episode earns its place in the middle of this list rather than the start. The show has now established that death is not confined to the stories, not confined to Halloween in spirit, even when it borrows Halloween's calendar, not confined anywhere it can be safely walled off. Death is in the frame. It is in the drive to the party, it is in the dumb shoving match in the back of the van, and once a show has demonstrated that it will kill its entire cast in the wraparound, the supposedly safe space, you can no longer fully relax inside any of its episodes because you have been shown that the floor is not solid. That is the groundwork. The next episode takes that idea and makes it the literal plot by asking what it would actually take mechanically to bring the dead back and then showing you the heroes buried alive while the answer pours out of a hole in the sky. The episode is called Exit 9B, and it is the first episode of the 4th season and the 80th episode of the series, and it first aired on the 1st of October 2012. It is a half-hour special, double the usual length which the show reserved for its biggest swings, and it uses that extra room to take an idea that has been sitting underneath every death we have looked at and drag it into the open. The idea is this. If death in this world is real, if the bodies on the mountain stay bones and the cart stays at the bottom of the lake, and the crash in the van actually kills everyone, then undoing death must be a genuine violation of the order of things. It must take something enormous. And Exit 9 Billion is the episode that shows you exactly how enormous by building its entire plot around the machinery required to bring the dead back and around the price the living pay while that machinery runs. The episode opens in a way that is disorienting on purpose. Time has passed. Roughly 2 months have gone by since whatever happened, and the park as you know it is gone. It has been seized and demolished by a mysterious bearded contractor, a stranger nobody quite questions, and in its place a massive highway construction project is underway, and the off-ramp at the center of it is the thing the episode is named for, Exit 9B. Worse than the demolition is what has happened to the characters. Everyone except Mordecai and Rigby has been brainwashed. The entire cast has had their memories rewritten so that they no longer remember the park, no longer remember their friendships, no longer remember each other. Benson now works for the stranger, dutifully as though he always has. Thomas has been installed as an intern and coffee runner, and in the detail that sets the emotional stakes, Mordecai and Rigby themselves meet partway through the haze and do not recognize one another. The two best friends at the center of the entire show stand near each other as strangers. The show has quietly killed the thing it is most about, the friendship. Not by ending it, but by erasing the memory of it, which is its own kind of death. A death of who people are while their bodies keep walking around. The stranger, it turns out, has a name and a motive, and both reach back into the show's own history. He is Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr., the son of a villain Mordecai and Rigby defeated in an earlier episode, a floating giant head they bested in a video game high score contest. The father lost and in losing was destroyed. And now the son has come for revenge, and his revenge is not small. Exit 9B, the off-ramp, the highway, the whole construction project, is a disguise and a delivery system for an interdimensional portal. The son intends to open a door between worlds and bring back every single villain that Mordecai and Rigby have ever defeated, across the entire run of the show, to resurrect all of them at once, an army of the show's dead enemies, as the instrument of his vengeance. The plan is, in its bones, a mass resurrection. He is going to reverse every defeat, undo every ending, and reopen every grave the heroes ever closed. And to stop them from interfering, the villain buries Mordecai and Rigby in cement. Not metaphorically. He encases them up to their necks in the ground, their heads sticking out of the hardened concrete, immobilized, while the portal does its work. Sit with that image for a moment, because it is one of the most quietly grim pictures the show ever composed. The two heroes are planted in the earth like grave markers, buried alive to the neck, unable to move or to help, forced to watch as a hole opens in the world and the dead come pouring back out of it. The living are in the ground and the dead are in the air. The show has inverted the natural arrangement of things and made you look at it. What comes out of the portal is a roll call of the show's history of killing and defeating its enemies, and the specificity of it is the point. The elder Garrett Bobby Ferguson returns. The zombies and the undead figure from a previous Halloween outing come back. The night owl returns. The malevolent urge that once tried to take over the body of a friend comes back. Susan, the figure tied to an early scheme against Benson, returns. One after another, the portal disgorges enemies the audience watch the heroes overcome, sometimes at real cost, and now all of those endings are being unwritten at once. Every villain represents an episode where the threat was beaten, a victory that was supposed to stay won, and the portal is canceling all of them simultaneously. It is the closest the show ever comes to stating its thesis out loud. that the only way to bring back what is gone is to tear open reality itself, and that even then what you get back is not life restored but the past forced violently into the present, where it does not belong. The rescue, when it comes from Skips, and the way it comes deepens rather than relieves the sense that this episode is operating on the border between the living and the dead. Skips, the immortal one, the one who knows everyone, summons help, and the help he summons is a gathering of cosmic and supernatural figures from across the show's mythology. He calls on Death himself, the literal personification of death, a recurring character on this show who arrives to fight on the side of the living. He calls on Gary, on Tecmo, on the god of basketball, on the guardians of eternal youth, on the lemon chef. These are not ordinary allies. They are forces, embodiments, beings that exist at the level of the universe's machinery, and they are mustered for what is effectively a battle over whether the dead get to come back. And the cost is paid even among them. In the fighting, the Lemon Chef collides with an entity called the Destroyer of Worlds and is killed in the process, a death on the rescuing side, mid-rescue, because in this show, even the cavalry is not exempt. The reinforcements take casualties, the Guardians free Mordecai and Rigby from the cement, and the back half of the battle becomes the work of undoing the brainwashing, of bringing the cast back to themselves, and the show stages this as its own kind of resurrection, the recovery of erased selves. Each character has to be snapped out of the false life that was installed in them, and the key, fittingly for this show, is identity at its most reflexive. Their catchphrases, the small verbal tics that are most essentially who they are. The friends are restored by being reminded of the exact phrases that make them themselves. Benson is the hardest to reach, the last to come back, his real self buried deepest under the false one, and the moment he surfaces, the moment the boss remembers who he is played as a genuine victory. And Thomas, the intern, gets to make a choice that matters. He signs a document that helps undo the construction project, throwing in with the park against the stranger. The villains are driven back. The portal is closed. The park is saved, and, in the show's usual way of finding the warm ending inside the dark one, Thomas comes through it all as a real member of the group. It is a triumphant episode. It is meant to be. The heroes win, the friends are restored, the dead enemies are sent back where they came from, and the show throws its whole mythology into the air as spectacle. But underneath the spectacle, the structure is doing the same thing it always does, only louder. Think about what the episode had to assemble in order to tell a story about resurrection. It needed an interdimensional portal, it needed 2 months of erasure and demolition. It needed the personification of death to take the field. It needed the heroes buried alive in the ground. It needed gods and guardians and a casualty among the rescuers. The show could not treat bringing back the dead as a small thing, a reset, a button, because it has spent its entire run insisting that death is not small and not resettable. So when it finally builds an episode around reversing death, it makes the reversal cost everything, makes it require a tear in the fabric of the world, and frames it not as a gift, but as a violation that the heroes have to fight to close back up. The image at the center of it, Mordecai and Rigby planted to their necks in cement, while the dead rain down out of a hole in the sky, is the whole argument of this video in a single frame. The living belong in the world and the dead belong in the ground, and the show will let you watch what it looks like when something tries to swap them. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So far, we have watched the show kill inside its stories, kill inside its frame, and build an entire special around the cost of trying to undo death. The Terror Tales have been the place it goes furthest, and we have 2 of them behind us, the first that murdered the cast and revealed the storyteller as the monster, the second that killed everyone in the frame and nearly sent them to hell. There is one more of these annual specials worth sitting with before the ending, and it is worth sitting with because it adds a flavor of horror the others mostly left alone. It trades some of the sudden killing for something slower and more bodily, a horror of transformation, of the body itself becoming wrong, and it sets that horror against one of the gentlest framing devices the show ever used, a long drive to go and see somebody's mother. The episode is the 4th Terror Tales of the Park, and it is the 4th episode of the 6th season and the 157th episode of the series, and it first aired on the 29th of October 2014. By the 6th season, the show had been doing this for years, and the annual Halloween installment had become a place where the writers clearly felt free. And this one uses that freedom in a slightly different direction than the others. Where the earlier specials leaned on sudden killing, this one spends more of its energy on a slower and more intimate kind of dread, the horror of the body itself going wrong, of a person being changed into something they are not, while keeping the show's signature trick of wrapping all of it in something warm. The warmth this time is a visit to a mother. The frame is that the characters have been out trick-or-treating, and afterward they are on a long drive, and the destination is the home of Muscle Man's mother, a character the show finally brings on screen here, Muscle Mom, seen in person for the first time. Muscle Man is exhausted from the night, and the others tell scary stories during the drive in order to keep him awake. That is the gentle engine of the whole thing. Friends keeping a tired friend alert on a dark road by telling him tales, on their way to see his mom. It is almost cozy. It is the kind of setup that exists on this show, specifically so that the show can violate it. The centerpiece story belongs to Pops, and it is the most ambitious literary borrowing the Terror Tales ever attempted, because it is built on the bones of one of the most unsettling short stories in the American canon. Pops tells a story modeled closely on the lottery, the Shirley Jackson story in which a quiet town gathers for an annual ritual that turns out to end in the ceremonial killing of one of its own. A story whose entire power comes from the calm, ordinary, neighborly way the community goes about selecting a person to destroy. The show takes that engine and fuses it with a bit of the besieged survivor's atmosphere of The Mist, the sense of a group trapped together while something terrible presses in. In the story, the characters are dressed as the planets of the solar system, a detail that is pure regular show, costuming a piece of genuine horror in something colorful and absurd. And the horror, when it arrives, is body horror of a specific and memorable kind. There are milk people. The threat is transformation. A person can be bitten and changed, their body converted into one of these milk people, their self overwritten by the change. And the segment delivers the dread of watching a member of the group be turned into something no longer human, and of another being seized and dragged away into the dark. It is the slow horror of looking at someone you know and watching them stop being themselves, becoming instead a thing that belongs to whatever is out there, and the show plays it for the queasy, creeping fear that it is, rather than for a quick shock. Notice how that pairs with the literary source. The lottery is frightening because the community treats an atrocity as routine, as a thing that simply happens every year, handled politely without alarm. And that is in a way the exact mode this entire show operates in. The Terror Tales are an annual ritual in which the cast is reliably put through transformation and death, calmly, on schedule, as a tradition. By borrowing the lottery specifically, the episode is reaching for a kind of horror that rhymes with the show's own relationship to death, the horror of the ordinary, the scheduled, the absorbed, something monstrous treated as just another part of the year. That rhyme between the source material and the show's own habits is worth making fully explicit, because it reveals how self-aware the series had become by its 6th season. The lottery works because of its calm. The horror is not in the violence at the end, but in the ordinariness leading up to it, the way the townspeople chat and gather and go through the familiar motions of a tradition whose endpoint is the killing of a neighbor, treating an atrocity as a scheduled civic event, handled politely, expected, absorbed into the rhythm of the year. The dread is the dread of normalization, of horror that has been folded so thoroughly into routine that no one in the story even registers it as horror anymore. And that, when you step back and look at the whole run of the show, is an almost perfect description of what the Terror Tales themselves have become by this point. They are an annual ritual in which the cast is reliably put through transformation and death, on schedule, every year, calmly as a tradition the audience looks forward to. By choosing the lottery as its model in its later years, the show is, whether it intends to or not, holding up a mirror to its own relationship with killing its characters. The most frightening thing is not the death. It is how routine the death has become, how the show and its audience have both grown comfortable with an annual sacrifice, the way the townsfolk have grown comfortable with theirs. And against that calm, notice the tempo this episode chooses for its horror, because the tempo is itself a departure from everything around it. Almost every death we have looked at so far arrives suddenly. The coma after a hard cut to an ambulance, the cart over the cliff, the head that says one syllable and goes still, the van into the tree. Sudden is the show's default setting for death, the quick and total removal of a life between one shot and the next. This episode slows that down. The dread of the milk people is not a shock, but a creep, a thing that approaches and spreads and is watched, a horror you see coming and cannot stop, rather than one that lands all at once. And that slowness rhymes with the source. The lottery is slow too, all gathering in ritual and small talk before the blow. By the 6th season, the show is no longer discovering the gap between its warmth and its darkness the way it did in its early years. It has lived in that gap so long that it has become fluent in it, able to set down a piece of genuine bodily horror at whatever pace it likes, calmly, without flinching and without explaining, because the contrast no longer surprises even the show. It is simply how this show breathes. And the episode does not leave the leads untouched, because in another of its tales, Mordecai and Rigby die and come back as ghosts to haunt Benson, Once again, the show reaches for the simplest, bluntest version of the move it has made all series. It kills its two protagonists, the central pair, the friendship the whole show is built around, and turns them into spirits, and it does this casually, as one story among several told to keep a tired man awake on a drive. By this point in the run, killing Mordecai and Rigby is not even the climax of the episode. It is a segment. It is a thing that happens on the way to somebody's mother's house. That is how thoroughly the show has normalized the death of its own leads. The deaths that would be the unthinkable end of another series are, here, just material, just another scary story for the road, deployed and absorbed and left behind as the van keeps driving. The reframe for this one is about texture more than escalation, and it is worth naming clearly. The other dark episodes mostly traffic in sudden death, the quick and permanent removal of a life. This one adds the horror of the in-between, the state that is worse than death, where the body persists, but the self is taken, where you are turned into something. The milk people are not simply killed. They are converted, made into the thing that threatens the others, and that is a particular fear the show had mostly only gestured at before. The fear not of ending, but of becoming wrong, of your own body being used against who you are. Set that against the framing, a tired friend being kept awake with stories on the way to see his mom, and you have the show's method in its mature form. The gentlest possible wrapper, a small act of friendship and care on a dark drive, around a center made of bodies that stop being people. The friendliness is not a lie, and the horror is not a joke. They are layered directly on top of each other, the same way they have been since the very first episode we looked at, and the layering is the thing itself. So that is the shape of it across all of these. A British horror tape that turns out to be a costume, a coma waiting at the bottom of an omelet, a wizard who murders the whole cast and then looks at you, a golf cart that lives for one day and dies for a clerical error, an immortal walking past the skeletons of everyone the mountain killed before him, a van full of friends who die in the frame and get fired for it, a portal that rains the dead back into the world while the heroes are buried alive to the neck, a town that kills one of its own every year, and friends who turn into something that is not them. Episode after episode, in a show shelved under slacker comedy, the real recurring subject has been death. Treated as genuine, treated as permanent, treated with a flatness that refuses to soften it even as the surface stays warm and silly and kind. That gap between the friendly surface and the dark machinery underneath is the source of everything disturbing about this show. It is not that the show is secretly grim. It is that it is sincerely both at once, and it never lets you off the hook by choosing. Which makes the way it ended almost unbearably fitting. After 8 years of treating death as a real and unwelcome thing that happens to people, whether they deserve it or not, whether it means anything or not, the show closed its story by doing the one thing it had never done. It let a character choose death. It let death, for once, be neither sudden nor pointless nor cruel, but deliberate and meaningful and gentle. It took the kindest character it had and let him walk toward the end on purpose, for the sake of everyone else, and in doing so, it reframed everything that came before it. The finale is where all of this lands, and it is where we are going now. The finale is called a regular epic final battle, and it is told across 3 parts, the 27th, 28th, and 29th episodes of the 8th and final season, the 3rd part carrying the title The Power. All 3 aired together on the 16th of January 2017. Each part runs the show's usual 11 minutes, so together they form a single piece a little over half an hour long. And the show treats it as exactly that, one continuous ending rather than 3 separate episodes, with its climactic battle score to the David Bowie song Heroes, a piece of music about ordinary people becoming for one day something larger than themselves. It is the last thing the show ever made, and it spends its entire length doing 2 things at once, paying off the slacker comedy you came for, and paying off the long meditation on death that has been running underneath the whole time. To understand why the ending hits the way it does, you have to know what the finale finally reveals about its gentlest character, and you have to watch what that character chooses. The character is Pops. For the entire run of the show, Pops has been the pure soul of the place. A soft, round, old-fashioned man who finds joy in small things, who is incapable of cruelty, who says good show and means it, who is so kind and so naive that the other characters protect him almost instinctively. He has read all this time as comic relief, as the harmless innocent. The finale reveals that he is something else entirely. Pops, whose full name is given as Pops Maillard, is in truth a being called Mega Cranus, and he comes from another world, a planet called Lollyland, and he has a twin. The twin is his exact opposite, a being of malice rather than kindness, named Antipops, known on their world as Malum Cranus. The 2 of them are not ordinary creatures. They are forces, cosmic twins of good and ill, and their conflict is older than anything else in the show. On their home planet, among its strange inhabitants, there is a guardian of Lollyland who has recorded the history of these two brothers across eons, woven into tapestries, and those tapestries reveal something that reframes the entire series in a single image. The two brothers have fought before, many times, across many lifetimes. And in the records of those past battles, you can see earlier incarnations of the park crew, of Mordecai and Rigby and the others, present again and again throughout the long war between the twins. The friendships you have watched for 8 years are revealed to be one turn of a wheel that has turned countless times. This has all happened before. It will happen again. The show has quietly told you that its little comedy about two friends at a park is a single recurrence of a conflict as old as the universe. The brothers are destined to fight a final battle that will decide the fate of everything, and the structure of that battle is set by a deal. Before it begins, the show makes sure you understand what the stakes feel like on a human scale, and it does this with a small, devastating gesture. The park crew, knowing what is coming, throws Pops a party, a sincere celebration of the friend they love. And as part of preparing for the end, they record their memories, their time together, everything they have shared, and they preserve those memories on Blu-ray discs, and they bury the discs in the park. They are doing what you do when you know an ending is near. They are making a record. They are putting the proof of the love somewhere safe, in the ground, so that even if everything else is lost, the fact that this happened will have been kept. It is a funeral rite performed in advance, a burial of memory, and the show stages it tenderly, friends safeguarding the evidence of one another against an erasure they can feel coming. The deal between the brothers is simple and cruel. Whoever lands the first blow will decide the fate of the universe, and Pops, the kind one, manages to land it. By the terms agreed, he has won the right to choose, and a being of pure goodness choosing the fate of everything should mean salvation. But Anti-Pops simply refuses to honor it. He breaks the deal, and the line he uses to justify breaking it is one of the most quietly bitter things in the finale, the observation that a deal is only ever as good as the one who makes it. The promise meant nothing because the one who made it never intended to keep it. Malice does not play fair, and the good brother's victory is voided by the bad brother's word being worthless. And Anti-Pops has help, because the show gives its final villain a face that fit the moment of its making. An entity called Streaming, attended by Streambox bots, a swarm aiding Anti-Pops, the destructive force of the new arrayed against the old park and everyone in it. In the chaos of the battle that follows, most of the cast is erased, wiped out of existence, everyone except the two brothers and Mordecai and Rigby, before they are eventually restored. The show, one last time, kills nearly everyone you care about, holds them in nothing, and then brings them back as if to remind you in its final hour exactly how fragile it has always insisted existence is. And then the third part begins, and the show makes its most deliberate gesture, the one that tells you it knew exactly what it was doing all along. The third part is called The Power, and it opens with a scene that recreates almost shot for shot the opening of the very first episode of the entire series, which was also called The Power. The show has come back to its own beginning. The first thing it ever showed you and the last thing it will show you are the same image, deliberately, a circle closed. It is a bookend, and it is the show telling you that everything between the first power and the last power has been a single complete story, with a shape, with an intention that the 8 years were not a pile of episodes but an arc that always knew where it was going. The battle reaches its climax, and the mechanism of the ending is, fittingly, the two friends at the center of the show. Mordecai and Rigby end up positioned between the knuckles of the two giant brothers as they throw their final colliding punch at each other, and that collision, with the two friends caught between the fists of good and evil, detonates. It obliterates the universe. It resets everything. The force of it is enough to unmake the world, and in the wash of that unmaking, Pops himself is sent tumbling back through it, all the way back to the precursor short film that the show's creator made before the series ever existed. A little piece called The Naive Man from Lollyland, the original seed of the character. Pops is returned to his own origin, the very first version of himself. The show folding him back to the point before any of it began. But the resolution, the actual ending of the war, does not come from the punch or the reset. It comes from the thing Pops is, which is kindness used as a weapon against a brother who has never known it. In the end, Pops does not defeat Anti-Pops by overpowering him. He defeats him by embracing him. He takes hold of his twin, his opposite, the embodiment of all the malice in their shared nature, and he holds him and he flies the two of them upward together into the sun. And as he carries them both toward the fire that will end them, he reaches out telepathically to Mordecai and Rigby to comfort them, to soothe the two friends he is leaving behind, to tell them, in effect, that it is all right. And the two friends who have spent the entire series in a relationship built on bickering and avoidance and the occasional fight reconcile in that moment, brought back together by the kindness of the man who is dying to save them. Because that is what it is. Pops dies. Permanently. This is not a Halloween death that does not count, and it is not a death the show reverses in the final seconds. Pops, the kindest character the show ever had, the soul of the park, carries his evil twin into the sun and is destroyed along with him, on purpose, by choice, in order to end the war and save everyone he loves. The show that spent 8 years insisting death is real, sudden, often pointless, and almost always permanent, ends by letting its gentlest character die a death that is none of those things. It is not sudden, it is chosen. It is not pointless, it is the most meaningful act in the entire series. It is not cruel, it is an embrace. And it is permanent, fully and finally permanent, which is the one quality it shares with every death that came before it. Pops does not come back. The show kills him for real, and it lets the death stand. And it asks you to understand the difference between this death and all the others. Every other death in the show was something that happened to someone. This is the first death in the show that someone gives. It is worth holding the two kinds of deaths side by side, slowly, because the entire meaning of the finale lives in the contrast, and the contrast answers a question the show had been asking, without ever stating it, for 8 years. Across everything we have walked through tonight, the deaths all share one quality, and it is easy to miss because it feels like simply what death is. They are things that happen to a character. They arrive from outside, unbidden, often for no reason at all, and the character is only ever their object, never their author. The coma comes for Rigby, the cliff comes for the cart, the crash comes for the whole van. Nobody in any of those deaths chooses it, asks for it, or means it. And the show every time declines to soften that, declines to explain it, declines to take it back, and that flat refusal, that unwillingness to let the dying mean more or hurt less than it actually does, is the source of all the unease we have been tracing. And then Pops carries his brother into the sun, and for the first time the grammar of death in this show reverses. Pops is not death's object, he is its author. He chooses it with full understanding as an act rather than an accident, and the choosing changes everything about what the death means without changing the one fact the show will never compromise on, which is that the death is permanent and he does not come back. Look at how precisely the finale inverts each quality that made the earlier deaths disturbing. The earlier deaths were sudden, this one is deliberate, prepared for, preceded by a party and a burial of memories. The earlier deaths were frequently pointless. This one is the single most purposeful act in the entire series, the thing that ends a war as old as the universe and saves everyone he loves. The earlier deaths were cold, met with a flat huh or a phone call about a clerical error. This one is warm, an embrace of the very brother who embodies all the malice in their shared nature, accompanied by a telepathic reaching out to comfort the friends he is leaving behind. The only quality this death shares with all the others is the one the show was never willing to surrender. It is permanent. Pops stays dead. The finale does not reach into the machinery and undo it the way it undid so many threats before. It lets the death stand, fully and finally, and asks you to sit with the fact that the kindest character is gone and is not coming back. That is the payoff the whole series was building toward, and it only works because the show spent 8 years earning the right to it by being honest about every death that came before. If the show had treated death as cheap, as resettable, as a joke that always undoes itself, then Pops choosing to die would mean nothing, because death would mean nothing. It is precisely because the show kept death real and permanent and frequently meaningless, because it showed you the bones on the mountain and the cart at the bottom of the lake and the head saying, huh, that the finale lands the way it does. The weight of all those earlier deaths is the weight Pops lifts when he chooses his. The show is saying, after 8 years of insisting that death is real and does not negotiate, that within that hard truth, there is still room for one more thing. That a death, while remaining just as permanent and just as final, can also be the most loving and most chosen act a person ever performs. It does not pretend death is anything other than the end, it simply shows that the end can be walked toward on purpose, for the sake of others, and that doing so is the closest thing to grace the show believes in. And then the show does something rare and generous for a story that has been so honest about loss. It lets you see the after. The finale does not end on the sun. It moves forward in time, well past the battle, and shows you what the survivors do with the lives that Pops bought them. The park, which had been carried away from Earth in the events leading to the finale, returns home, settling back to the ground sometime after the other parks, a few years after it left. And then the show gives you a long montage that leaps forward roughly a quarter of a century, an entire generation, and lets you watch the characters age and live and change across all that time. It is one of the most moving sequences the show ever produced, precisely because it grants its characters the thing the show had so often denied. Other characters, A full long life, lived out, all the way. Within that span, the old man who ran the park, Mr. Maillard, the human father figure tied to Pops, dies of old age, off-screen, the way most people actually die, quietly, in the fullness of time, an ordinary death to set against the cosmic one. Linger on the generosity of that epilogue, because it is rarer and more deliberate than it first appears, and it completes the show's argument in a way the battle alone could not. Most stories that are honest about death end at the death. They let the loss be the last word, because that is the brave thing, the unsentimental thing. This show, having been as honest about death as any cartoon ever made, chooses instead to keep going to leap forward a full quarter of a century and let you watch the survivors actually live. And in doing so, it grants its main characters the one thing it spent 8 years denying to so many others, which is a complete life, unfolded all the way to its natural end. The cart got one day. The figures on the mountain got only as far as their failing hearts would carry them. But Mordecai and Rigby and the rest are given decades, given the long ordinary middle of a life, given the chance to grow older and change and drift and come back together. And the show lets you see it. That is the gift Pops bought with his death. And the epilogue exists so that you can see exactly what was purchased. Not a reset, not a return to the way things were, but a future, the simple continuation of living that death so often interrupts. And notice how carefully the show places an ordinary death inside that future, almost as a quiet counterweight to the enormous one. Mr. Maillard, the old man who ran the park, the human father figure bound up with Pops, dies during the time skip of nothing more dramatic than old age, off-screen, the way the overwhelming majority of people actually die, quietly, in the fullness of years, without a battle or a portal or a sacrifice. After a series full of sudden, strange, violent, and cosmic deaths, the show makes room for the most common death there is, the one that simply comes at the end of a long life, and it lets that one pass almost without comment, folded into the montage. It is the show's last small act of honesty about mortality that, alongside all the spectacular ways the series imagined a life could end, there is also just this, the ordinary closing of an old man's long story, and it counts too, and it is permanent too. And it arrives for everyone who lives long enough. The statue of Pops standing in the returned park gathers all of it together. It is a monument to the one who chose to die, watched over by the ones who got to live because he did, in a place that outlasted them all, and it asks the survivors, and the audience, to remember without being undone by the remembering. And in the park there now stands a statue of Pops, a monument to the friend who saved them, the kind one watching over the place he loved. The friends are scattered into their grown lives, and at the end of the time skip they come back together, middle-aged now, to reminisce, to remember, to be in each other's company one more time, older and softer and still bound by what they shared. And the very last image the show ever offers is the gentlest possible answer to the question the whole series has been circling. After everything, the final shot finds Pops again, in an afterlife, a soft place of clouds, at peace. And he is watching a screen. On the screen is a videotape, an old VHS cassette, and the cassette is labeled Regular Show. He has been watching the series itself, the whole thing, all of it, every episode you have just spent this video thinking about. And as it finishes, he reaches out and ejects the tape, and he says the thing he has always said, the small benediction that was his catchphrase from the beginning, that it was a jolly good show. And that is the end. The kindest character, having chosen to die so the others could live, sits in a peaceful afterlife and watches the record of all their time together, and finds it good, and says so, and lets it go. Consider what that final image does to everything underneath it, to all the death we have been tracing. For 8 years, the show treated death as the thing it refused to lie about. It would make you laugh, and it would make you cheer, but it would not pretend that the wizard's victims got back up, or that the cart was waiting at home after all, or that the skeletons on the mountain were sleeping. It kept death real and permanent and frequently meaningless, with a flatness that was the most disturbing thing about it, the head saying, huh, the call about the accounting error, the bones in their armor. And then, at the very end, having earned it across an entire series, the show reached for that same permanent death one last time, and transformed it. It let death be a gift instead of an accident. It let the one who died choose it and mean it and find peace on the other side of it. It did not soften the fact that Pops is gone and stays gone. What it softened was the meaning. It said, after all those pointless deaths, that a death can also be the most purposeful thing a person ever does, an act of love large enough to end a war. The gap that made the show disturbing, the gap between the warm surface and the dark machinery, closes in the final shot, because for the first and only time, the warmth and the death are not in tension. They are the same thing. The kindest character and the most permanent death are the same character, the same act, the same quiet, jolly good show. That is the shape of it, then, the whole disturbing and tender architecture of a cartoon that everyone remembers as a comedy. Underneath the slacker jokes and the talking animals and the 80s soundtrack, the show was the entire time telling the truth about death, that it is real, that it stays, that it often arrives for no reason and explains nothing and moves on without you. It built that truth into a coma at the bottom of an omelet and a golf cart at the bottom of a lake, into a mountain paved with the dead and a frame that kills everyone in it, into a portal that rains the defeated back into the world and a town that sacrifices one of its own every year. And then, having been honest about all of that, it gave the truth one last turn and let its gentlest soul choose to die for love and rest and call the whole thing a good show. If you came here to fall asleep, then let that be the thought you drift off on, the soft round man in the clouds, ejecting the tape, at peace, having decided that all of it, the joy and the loss and the long, strange war underneath, was worth it. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.